Hey everyone, it's Spencer Hakimian, and welcome back to yet another episode of What's Moving Your Money with Forbes. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the verbal dispute between President Trump and Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. We're also going to be talking about Trump's proposed idea for tariff rebates, whether that would be good, whether that would be bad, whether that's logically consistent at all. And we're going to end the episode talking about Japan's recent allegations that they do not fully agree to every part of the supposed trade deal that was made earlier in this week. So sit back tight, grab yourself something to eat and drink, and I hope you guys enjoy. So the biggest news in markets yesterday was the meeting between Trump and Powell that happened at the Federal Reserve. It's memes galore all over the internet already. We have pictures of Trump and Powell in hard hats. They were disputing line item budget costs for a project that finished 5 years ago. They were also talking about interest rates. They were also hinting at the fact of whether or not Powell would either be fired or quit, and more. Now, the bottom line is, despite all the distractions that we got for the cable news crowd, we have to understand what is happening here, because there is an underlying shift and an underlying current that is much more important than anything that we are seeing in these verbal disputes. And it is that over time, and this is not just Trump's fault, you can blame multiple presidents for this, but over time, we are slowly but surely losing monetary credibility as a country. Monetary independence is slowly being taken away. We have Democrat presidents that only elect partisan Democrats to serve on the Fed board. We have Republican presidents that only elect partisan Republicans to serve on the Fed board. And over time, we risk letting the Federal Reserve, which in my opinion is the most important institution, public institution in the United States, because they are the lender of last resort. They are the ones that can make decisions unilaterally without having to debate for long times within Congress. When there is an emergency, it is the Fed that is there being the firefighter. It is nobody else. We risk allowing the Fed to become a partisan institution that will only do what its side wants. You know, in many ways, this mimics the evolution of what happened to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court used to be considered a neutral third party that was simply calling balls and strikes. But over time, it changed to a partisan court where you can guess the vote on any case in your head before it comes out. That's not good, right? That does not mean that they're applying rule of law entirely perfectly. It means that they're doing what they politically believe to be right. If we get a Federal Reserve that begins to drift in that way, we are going to get higher bond yields, higher mortgage costs, higher auto loans, higher construction costs, higher credit card interest, and a lot more. The Fed must remain independent, particularly the chair, because he is the front-facing person on that committee. The Fed Board of Governors is 7 people. 99.5% of Americans cannot name you one other person on that board, despite how important they are. Most people know that Jerome Powell is the chairman of the Fed, and that's about it that they know about it. So if you have the most prominent member being essentially a puppet of the president who got to choose him, you are going to pay the price substantially for it. If you check out my TikTok, my Twitter page, my Instagram, my YouTube, my personal YouTube, I made a short reel on what this means for your wallet. Fed independence is a lot more important than you would otherwise think. Monetary policy is half of the puzzle in the United States. So it is very important that we maintain the sacredness and the independence of that institution. By the way, do not think I am the biggest defender of Jerome Powell. I've essentially disagreed with everything that Powell did from January 2021 and beyond. I highly supported what he was doing during the coronavirus crisis of 2020 because it was urgent. But after 2021, he kept his foot on the stimulus gas too long. Signs of inflations were popping up everywhere by the spring of 2021, yet he did not act until the spring of 2022. And that full year of sitting on his hands likely was part of the reason why we got 9% inflation at its peak in the United States. And by the way, inflation never comes back down. So that was a permanent tax hike, cost of living hike, sales tax hike, whatever you want to call it, on the American people. Now, let's get into a different topic that I found very interesting. This morning, President Trump came out and said that he is strongly considering passing a law within Congress that would give rebates to Americans for the tariff revenue collected. Now, he himself is marketing this in a certain way. The way he is marketing this is that this is essentially a transfer from foreign governments, from foreign producers, from foreign consumers, directly into the pockets of Americans. Now, that is obviously false. We are already seeing things that are the most heavily tariffed rise in price, and guess who's paying for it? It's the American consumer that is paying for it. What is really happening here is that Trump has an inflation problem. In the exact same way that Biden had an inflation problem in 2022, and it stuck with him throughout his entire presidency, Trump now has an inflation problem. There's so much polling out right now amongst independent voters, amongst the entire American electorate, amongst Democrat or Republican voters, that the single issue that Trump has lost the most ground on has been on inflation. Some reputable polls from pollsters like Atlas Intel, who was the most accurate pollster in 2016, 2020, and 2024. They have been considered one of those pollsters that really has their pulse on the Trump voter, on the Trump base. They are saying Trump has lost 35 points on inflation since January. This was the reason he got elected, was because Americans were fed up with the inflation they experienced during Biden's presidency, so they took another chance on Trump, and he appears to be losing ground on that. Now, if Trump is noticing that these tariffs are unpopular because of their inflationary impact, one way he can mitigate that unpopularity is by offering rebates, offering money back from the tariffs collected to Americans. But this kind of defeats the whole purpose. This is kind of somewhat incoherent. You are taking money out of the right pocket of Americans, and then you are putting it back into their left pocket. Why don't you just not take the money to start? Why must we do these two extra steps for no reason? This does not seem logically consistent. But beyond the inconsistency of the logic, this actually poses an inflationary problem and a risk. Think about it. Prices are rising because companies have to pass on the cost increases that they're getting to consumers, because that's the only way that this can be settled one way or another, which is causing inflation. If you give Americans money back and they can afford to buy those products, you are creating a self-fulfilling cycle. You are getting inflation through the tariffs. You're giving Americans stimulus. They are using that money to afford the tariffs, and you're putting two ends of inflation pressure that were not there 6 months ago. This is really not a smart idea. It's showing in the polling. It's showing in inflation numbers. I don't understand why we are doing this. Yes, there are some benefits to be had from tariffs. Absolutely. Yes, tariff revenue goes up. Yes, when you raise taxes, tax revenue goes up. That's exactly what it means. But is this the smartest way to do it? Is taxing consumption, this is essentially a sales tax, is taxing consumption the best way to generate tax revenue? There are millions of different ways that you can generate tax revenue. Taxing consumption, especially on poor and middle class people, might be economically deflationary, because these are the people that spend the most back into the economy. Listen, I myself would get hurt if we raise capital gains tax in the country. I wouldn't want that to happen. But my consumption wouldn't change. I'm doing well, right? But if you raise taxes on someone that is paycheck to paycheck, they pull back their consumption. That literally impacts the economy immediately in the form of lower consumption, lower business sales, lower everything. Now, one final note here. We have to talk about something that the Financial Times reported on this morning. They are reporting on something alarming, if you ask me. Japan is heavily disputing many parts of the so-called trade deal that the United States and Japan allegedly agreed to. They are disputing specifics about rice imports. They are disputing specific about car quotas. They are disputing that $550 billion signing bonus, quote unquote. There is a lot of stuff that Japan is disputing. Now, this doesn't come as much of a surprise to me, but I think what it shows is there is a lack of teeth to these deals, right? Anyone can sign a memorandum of understanding, if you want to call it that. But if nobody goes through with these actions, what is this all for? If you remember, back in 2018 and 2019, when we reached phase 1 of a trade deal with China, they had agreed to increase their soy, corn, wheat purchases from American farmers. They never got anywhere close to those numbers. Why? Because these deals are not legally binding. A deal on Truth Social is quite a lot different than a deal that can be enforced by a court of law or by in contract law or whatever it may be. So I just want you to keep an eye out on this in the coming weeks as we head to the August 1st deadline, that not just for the deals, but can these deals actually be enforced? Because if they cannot be enforced, what is the point of it all? That's my time today, guys. You can watch our episodes on Forbes website, on Forbes YouTube page, on my Twitter page, on my Instagram, on my TikTok, and on my personal YouTube page as well. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys back again on Monday.